Saturday, August 16th, 1969. 2 p.m. Carlos Santana was 22 years old and terrified. Not of the crowd. He'd played crowds before. Smaller ones, louder ones. Crowds that didn't care who you were and made you earn every second of their attention. He knew how to handle that. What he couldn't handle was the math. 500,000 people. The number didn't feel real. It felt like something someone had invented. The way you invent numbers when you're trying to describe something that doesn't have a real number yet. He was standing in the wings of the Woodstock stage, looking out at the field, and the field just kept going. Past the first few rows of people, past the part where you could still make out individual faces, it turned into something else entirely. A living thing, breathing, shifting, waiting. His band had been called out early. Another act had dropped. The schedule was falling apart. And suddenly there was a gap and someone was pointing at Santana and saying, "You're on." He looked at his bandmates. Nobody said anything. They walked out. What happened in the next 45 minutes, Carlos Santana would spend the rest of his life trying to describe. The thing about Woodstock is that most people who talk about it weren't really there. Or they were there, but somewhere out in that field, too far back to see anything, surviving on whatever food they could find, soaked through from the rain. The Woodstock of legend and the Woodstock of reality were two very different places. But the stage was real. Santana's set was real. He played Soul Sacrifice that afternoon, and somewhere in the middle of it, something shifted. The crowd stopped being a crowd and became something else. Something unified, something that moved as one body. The drums locked in, the percussion locked in, and the guitar went somewhere that felt less like playing and more like channeling. Even the other musicians on stage looked at each other with a kind of quiet disbelief. This wasn't what they'd rehearsed. This was better than anything they'd rehearsed. When it ended, the roar that came back at them was physical. You could feel it in your chest. Backstage, people were shaking his hand, saying things he could barely hear over the ringing in his ears. Someone said, "You just changed everything." Someone else said, "That was the set of the festival." He nodded, smiled, said thank you. He believed them. He had no reason not to. The hours after the set passed in a blur. There were people everywhere backstage. Musicians, managers, journalists, crew members carrying cables and equipment. The generator hum never stopped. Someone was always talking into a walkie-talkie. The sky was doing something complicated. Clouds piling up, the light going flat and strange, threatening something without quite delivering it. Santana sat with his band. They ate whatever food was around. They talked about the set, what worked, what didn't, that moment in Soul Sacrifice when everything opened up. There was a happiness in the conversation that felt earned. Not the happiness of relief, but the happiness of having done something you didn't know you were capable of until you did it. At some point, people started leaving. By Saturday night, the crowd had thinned. Not because the festival was ending, but because the rain had come in hard and people were cold and muddy and exhausted. Hundreds of thousands of people had made the calculation that a warm car, a tent, anything with a roof, was worth more than whatever was left on that stage. By early Sunday morning, the field that had held 500,000 people held maybe 30,000. Santana was still there. He wasn't tired exactly. He was running on something else. The after image of the set, the feeling that something important had happened and he wasn't ready to let go of it yet. Then someone said, "Jimmy's going on soon." He almost didn't go to the stage. That's the part of this story that doesn't fit the legend. The legend says everyone gathered, everyone watched, everyone understood in advance what was about to happen. The reality is that Santana was exhausted and he'd already had his moment and part of him just wanted to sit down somewhere quiet. But something pulled him. He found a spot in the wings, stage left, where he could see the stage and also see what was left of the crowd. The sky had started to go gray at the edges. Not sunrise yet, but the hour just before it, when the dark starts losing its grip but the light hasn't arrived to replace it. Jimi Hendrix walked out onto that stage like he was walking into his own kitchen. No big announcement, no countdown. He just appeared in his white fringed outfit, moving slowly, and the remaining crowd made a sound. Not the roar from the previous days, but something quieter and harder to name. Almost reverent. 30,000 people who had stayed through the cold and the mud and the long hours of waiting, and now here he was. He picked up his Stratocaster. He adjusted one tuning peg. Just one, like he had all the time in the world. Santana watched from the side and said nothing. The first notes of the Star-Spangled Banner came out of that guitar, and Carlos Santana stopped breathing. He would say this in interviews, many times, over many years, always with the same expression. A slight narrowing of the eyes, like he was watching it happen again, right in front of him. He stopped breathing. He didn't notice until he had to. What Jimi did with that song, it wasn't exactly playing. It wasn't even performing in the way that word usually means. It was something closer to excavation. He took the most familiar melody in America and took it apart, note by note. And inside the spaces between those notes, he placed everything that was present in that moment. The war, the protests, the grief, the anger, the generation that had built this field, and the reasons they'd come. The guitar screamed and went quiet and screamed again, and 30,000 people who thought they were too tired to feel anything discovered they were wrong. Santana stood in the wings and did not move. He had played earlier that day. He had played well. He had made that crowd respond in a way that genuinely shocked him. He had walked off that stage believing something real had happened. Now he wasn't entirely sure what to call what he'd done. The set lasted nearly 2 hours. At some point, Santana wouldn't be able to say exactly when. He sat down on a road case in the wings. Not because he was tired, because standing required something he wasn't sure he had left. He watched Jimi move across that stage. The way he played behind his back, and it wasn't a trick. It was just another option, a natural extension of what his hands already knew. The way he stood still sometimes and the guitar still moved underneath him. The way he'd let a note sustain past where any note should reasonably sustain, until it turned into something else, until it became texture rather than sound, atmosphere rather than music. Around him, other musicians and crew were watching. Nobody was talking. There was a quality to the silence that was different from any other silence backstage that weekend. This was the silence of people watching something they didn't have language for yet. The sun came up while Jimi was playing. Santana noticed it the way you notice something at the edge of your vision. The field getting lighter, individual faces becoming visible again, the sky going from gray to pale gold at the horizon. The timing felt intentional, even though it wasn't. It just happened that way. When it was over, the crowd made that sound again. The quiet, exhausted, reverent sound. 30,000 people who had been awake all night, who would carry this particular morning for the rest of their lives. Jimi waved once. He turned. He walked off. He passed close to where Santana was standing. They made eye contact briefly. Jimi nodded. Santana nodded back. That was it. No conversation. No exchange. Just two people in the same corridor, one of them having just done something that would still be discussed 50 years from now. In the days after Woodstock, Santana gave interviews. There were many of them. Suddenly, everyone wanted to talk to him. He answered questions about his set, about the festival, about what the music meant. He was gracious. He was honest. But when someone asked him about Jimi, something changed in how he spoke. The sentences got shorter. The pauses got longer. He'd start to say something and then stop, as if he was weighing the words before committing to them. "I thought I understood the guitar," he said in one early interview, "and then I watched him play and realized I understood some of the guitar. A part of it, one angle of it." He paused for a long moment. He understood the whole thing. He didn't say it bitterly. There was no resentment in it, no self-pity. He said it the way you say something that is simply true, the way you describe a mountain range to someone who's never left a flat city. There it is. That's what it is. That's how large it actually gets. Over the months that followed, Santana practiced differently, not more hours, differently. He started asking questions of the guitar he hadn't thought to ask before. Not, "How do I get better?" but "What else is in here?" The distinction mattered more than he could fully articulate. When Jimi died in September 1970, Santana was on the road. He heard the news the way everyone heard it, suddenly from someone who just heard it themselves. The information arriving before there was any context to hold it. He was 23 years old, and the musician who had most altered how he understood his own instrument was gone. He didn't talk about it publicly for a while. Years later, decades later, he came back to it constantly. Almost every long interview eventually circled back to that morning. The wings of the Woodstock stage, the gray light, the remaining crowd, the guitar playing sounds that seemed to have no reasonable origin. Woodstock was the greatest night of my life, he said in an interview much later. And at the end of it, Jimmy showed me what the greatest night of someone else's life looks like. A pause. They're not the same thing, and it took me a long time to make peace with that. The interviewer waited. I walked off that stage thinking I had arrived somewhere, Santana said, and then I watched him play and understood that where I'd arrived was the beginning, that there was a whole road in front of me I hadn't seen yet. He looked at his hands briefly. I'm still on that road. I'm grateful he showed it to me. There's a version of this story that wants to make it a competition. Santana against Jimmy, youth against mastery, the challenger against the standard. That version is cleaner, easier to package, but that's not what happened. What happened is simpler and stranger. A young man played the set of his life, and then he stayed, when most people left he stayed, to watch someone else play. And what he saw that morning didn't diminish what he'd done. It changed the size of what he thought was possible. That's different. The Woodstock stage is gone now. The field looks like a field again. But Carlos Santana still plays guitar, still tours, still tells that story with the same expression on his face. The slight narrowing of the eyes, the pause before the sentence. The sense that even now, after all these years, he's still standing somewhere in those wings, and the sun is still coming up, and the guitar is still playing. He stayed when 300,000 people left. He was 22 years old, standing in the dark before dawn, watching Jimi Hendrix take a song apart and put something bigger back in its place. He has never quite left that spot.